Hi, I'm John DeDakis. I'm a novelist, a writing coach, a manuscript editor, and a former editor on CNN's The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer. You're one-to-one with me, and I'm one-to-one with novelist K.L. Murphy. There she is. How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for doing this. First, let's talk about pen names because you're Kelly. I know you as Kelly, but
Yes.
you are KL. And is that people look? I edit people's manuscripts. I do writing one-on-one coaching, and almost every class people ask about pen names or what name should I use. So how did you go about deciding on this as the way to present yourself?
It was actually suggested by my editor at
Okay.
HarperCollins. I I originally, I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I originally was using my full name and that was too complicated. And there was another Kelly Murphy out there. So the editor at HarperCollins suggested K.L. Murphy, and I just wanted to go with it.
So that was about what, 12 years ago or so, right?
Yes. Yes. No, 2014.
But did it have to do with the fact that that at least in your Detective Cancini mysteries, you are a woman writing as a man? So would that have been one of those possible blips marketing wise?
It played in, but it was not the main reason. I think the main reason was because originally the name was just too long to do the whole name, and I didn't want to conflict. There's just sometimes when I've seen it with other authors. There's, Joe Hart. I think there's two of them, and it's just confusing at times. And so I just didn't want to do that.
But you say that the woman writing as a man was part of it.
A little
Talk,
bit, a
yeah.
little bit.
And so what was the thinking there?
Well, it's old school to think that way, that a woman can't write a man successfully and vice versa. And I say that to you as someone who successfully writes a strong female character
Thank you.
as a man. I think that's old school, but I think because it existed, so many people got used to initial names that it sounds also like a mystery writer. When you
Ah,
say it, I think a lot of times people think mystery writer.
so do people call you KL?
My daughter and her friends do sometimes.
Talk, we're going to talk about your new book, but let's go back and talk about the Detective Cancini thing.
Okay.
And let's talk about writing a female writing as a male. How were you
Mhm.
able to get into the head of this species?
Um, I don't know if it's getting in the head exactly, or more just that I've always been comfortable around men, and it just was easy. Had a lot of male friends, have brothers. My dad was a strong personality, my husband's strong personality. It just wasn't hard in a lot of ways. And of course, if you've watched, detective shows, there's a lot of men. So it's really not that hard. I didn't find it that hard to do.
Did you ever get any kind of blowback from men who said, "Oh, you're not doing this right at all," or anything like that?
Nope,
Okay.
never.
And no women raised an eyebrow about how dare you?
No,
Okay.
no. And the editors never mentioned that either.
Okay. So it really is passé. It's
I
like
hope so.
let's move on, right?
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Okay. Okay. So you have a new novel out, and we might as well add that to the stream so that we can get a good look at it. In fact, let's get a solo look at it. So
Okay.
while we're looking at the cover, tell us about her sister's death, because my hunch is this is different than, Detective Cancini. And is this considered a standalone?
This is a standalone. I'm not saying that Val and Terry, who are main characters, will never come back. It's just not something I'm working on right now,
Mhm.
or it's not part of a contract. So it was pitched as a standalone, so that's where it is right now. And yes, it is very different. It's a departure, and I wanted to do something different. Um, I
How
had
how
go
does the cover reflect the story?
The cover reflects the story with the old time key,
Mhm,
and that's a little bit of a clue that you've got, there's 2 timelines in this book. One is current, present day, and the other one is 1921.
mhm,
And, but both take place primarily in the same hotel.
mhm.
So there's a tie-in, but you don't know what it is as the reader until you get to the end.
Did you have anything to do with the cover design?
They ran them by me, yes. Um, I don't know, honestly, I I don't think that's what I would have pictured initially in my mind,
Mhm.
but they sent me several different options, and I liked it, and I must say that I've absolutely loved being able to use that blue color in a lot of marketing. It's a
Ah,
great background,
uh-huh.
and I never would have thought of it in a million years, but it
Huh.
worked.
Yeah. So why, Baltimore? It's a fictitious hotel, I believe. I live in Baltimore, and I'm not familiar with Franklin.
Yeah, there is no Franklin.
Ah,
I, went to Malice Domestic several years ago, and an author was speaking about her nonfiction book, An Unexplained Death. And a man had disappeared from a building, the Belvedere, that was once a historic hotel but had become condos. And he was eventually found, but they never determined whether he committed suicide or had been murdered. His wife suspected that he had been murdered, but she didn't know who his enemies would be. And I was just fascinated by this story at the same time she was talking about how people did take their own lives in hotels because it was anonymous. And I just never had thought of that. Combined with the fact that I started thinking about having been on some ghost tours in Key West, how old historic hotels are known for being haunted. And I sort of was inspired by the idea of both of these two things, an unexplained death and a haunting. And I just kept it in Baltimore because Baltimore can give you that vibe. It's got the charm, but it's got an edge to it. And so I just kept it there.
would you consider this paranormal? I mean, it was it was very subtle.
I would consider it has a paranormal element, but it is very subtle and it's a sliver.
Yeah.
The main story is more trying to figure out what happened to Sylvia and what's going to happen in the 1921 story, where it's going.
Right, exactly. So it's really more of a mystery than anything.
Yes, it's primarily mystery with a little splash of the supernatural.
And I would say some of the strong undercurrents would have to do with spousal abuse and suicide.
Yes, and the publisher wisely, I think, put some cautions at the beginning of the book. And I know they're really delicate subjects, and I try to handle them as sensitively as possible. But both are true, are real, and we can't avoid writing about things just because they're unpleasant.
Absolutely. And I noticed at the end of the book, there are several links for, either suicide hotlines or spousal
Mhm,
abuse,
mhm.
websites. There's even an international component. So,
Yes.
this is, you're doing, in a sense, a public service because, I mean, the spousal abuse scenes, especially, were very eyebrow raising for me because this kind of stuff happens,
Mhm.
but it's unfathomable to realize how it impacts psychologically the person who's being abused, and the how they're affected by this. And of course, we're still in many ways in the dark ages on this. It's still often a he said, she said.
Yes.
And so it's important for you, I believe, to have faced it as head on as you did in this. It's very powerful.
And I do know those are hard scenes for some people to read. My critique group definitely some of the people in my critique group, they liked the writing, but they did have a difficult time because just, they're
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, it's not gratuitous, and
No, not at all.
you're not bombarded with this constantly. It's much more, I would say, it's much more nuanced psychologically. And there are certainly other things that are going on as well. So it's not, a, Johnny one note, hammering on the issue. It's, good storytelling has to do with relationships, and you really did an excellent job of fleshing out the relationships. You use dialogue very effectively.
Thank
In
you.
fact, let's talk about dialogue for a
Okay.
second, because a lot of my students have trouble with that. I mean, I write dialogue almost exclusively for my first draft. So broadcast journalism is writing for the ear, whereas a lot of people, writing is explaining and showing, not so much showing, but narrating, and
Mhm.
all that stuff. So how did you learn to show and not tell, and to appropriate effective, realistic dialogue?
That's a good
Use
question.
use both sides of the page if necessary.
Um, I I didn't major in creative writing, but I did take creative writing for fun, after work, after my day job when I was young, before I had kids. And um, when I first started taking writing seriously, I started with short stories and entering little contests that it forced you to have an economy of words, which makes your dialogue really important. It has to be relevant to the story. You don't have a lot of extra words for description or dialogue. So I think it kind of helped. And I do think that when I am writing it, like you, I do a lot more dialogue in the first, maybe not exclusively, but I'll go back and add description that helps the dialogue. I write the dialogue as I hear it in my head, as I hear someone saying it. And that's why I think it just feels sort of natural to me. It's exactly the way I hear it.
Are you a seat of the pantser, a planner, both?
I am more of a pantser. If
Ex-
there's any outline,
explain
like the
explains how that explain how that works for you.
when I sit down at my computer to start writing a chapter, I don't know what I'm going to write before I start writing it. I know how my book begins. I know how it ends. I don't know how I get there. I don't even know what characters are necessarily coming in until they come in.
That seems so counterintuitive. It's like writing without a net. So, I mean, you would think that that would be the perfect reason to have writer's block, because you don't know where you're going.
Well, I know where I'm going. I know I'm going to I know who did it.
Yeah, but you got to get to point B before you get to point Z.
I do. I think for me, it lets my imagination run a little wild. And definitely I've had times when I take things out after I've put them in. Uh, but it's not, you know, 20,000 words. It might be, a chapter comes out here, a chapter comes out there because it doesn't serve the story.
And how many drafts would you say your books go through?
Hmm, maybe 4 to 5, something like that. And then any changes made after beta readers tend to be minimal. It's not a whole draft again. It's generally smaller things.
Talk about the whole beta reader process. How do you find beta readers, and why is that helpful for you?
It's helpful for me. Well, first of all, one of my best beta readers, two of them are my sister and my daughter, which I know you're not supposed to do,
Yeah,
but yeah, I know. But they're both really honest
yeah.
because they know I want to hear it. And they're both, my sister is an avid reader, almost exclusively mysteries. So that helps.
She knows the genre.
She knows the genre. And while that's not my daughter's specialty, she's a really good writer herself. And so she picks up on different things than my sister. And then I just have some trusted readers that I've had that have read a couple of them, and also critique group, like former critique group friends who maybe I'm not in that group anymore, or they dropped out. I can trust them because they write, they're in the genre, and they tell me this isn't working or this is working.
I've heard that writing groups are sort of a mixed blessing, that, in some cases they can be excellent for constructive feedback, but in other cases they can be so fickle that you'll be driven and tossed by everybody's opinion and never quite get it right.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in two, which is not very many. One I dropped out of very quickly because one writer pretty much dominated the whole group. The last one I was in, the only reason I'm not still in it is because it's just a time commitment I can't make right now. But what made it work was it was organized. It was structured. One person led the meeting every time. You were maxed out on how many pages you could submit. So nobody was, one person wasn't hogging all of the attention. And you were only allowed to discuss major things at the group meeting. You don't talk about, you said, blue 3 times. You just circle those on the page, but you only talk about the big things.
Right.
And so it felt constructive. I got a lot out of that group. I wish I had the time for it. I just don't right now.
Yeah. You started as a business major at the College of William and Mary, and you went
Yes.
into finance, or at least banking, but you really wanted to go into journalism.
I did.
What happened?
When I was in high school, I was, editor of my yearbook for 2 years. I was on the school newspaper, that sort of thing. So I applied to William and Mary, and I didn't look up what majors they had. Because in those days, I don't think we paid that much attention. You just wanted to get into whatever good school you could get into. So I went, and they didn't have it. And my dad said, "Why don't you major in business?" And it sounded good. So I did. That's how that happened.
Were you happy with business? I mean, in banking?
I was pretty good with numbers. So doing a lot of spreadsheets was fine. I wasn't a corporate banker. I wasn't consumer banker. I was in charge of budgeting for the bank that I worked for.
So what
spreadsheet.
Okay. So what prompted you to go to start writing fiction?
Well, after I had my second child, I stopped working. I'd gone part-time for a while, stopped working, and I had a third one right away. And so when I wanted to start getting back into doing things, I pivoted and just didn't go back to banking, and I just started writing instead.
Uh-huh. And what do you know now about the business of writing, the process of writing, that you wished you'd known when you first started writing fiction?
Well, I think that I didn't do enough research when I first started, which now is completely available to anyone. How to write a query letter, how, lists of agents to approach, or publishers if you want to do that, or even the best way to self-publish. All of those things, there's so much more information than there was when I started. I also think it's harder because even more and more people do it. So, you hear about how many agents are just overwhelmed. I think that's grown year after year after year. And the same with editors. It's the business has gotten so hard, and marketing is harder because there's so many ways to do it, and there's more responsibility on the authors themselves. So I think it wouldn't change my doing it, but it would have been good to know what went into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, the first novel that you got that was published, A Guilty Mind, I find this fascinating. You first self-published it, and then HarperCollins picked up the novel. This is not usually done. They'll usually, if they like you as a writer, they'll say, "Great, that self-published one is wonderful. Now let's do something new." What was it that allowed them to say, we want to go big with this?
Well, so the first novel I did query it, and had been asked for some revisions by agents, but it just never got past that stage. So I decided to self-publish it. I just figured I'd give it a shot. I wrote the second one and decided that I knew it was a long shot, but I thought I would send it to a couple of agents, and I think I did 3 publishers. One was HarperCollins, and they'd started a new imprint, which was going to be their digital first imprint for mysteries, and they had gotten the rights to all the Agatha Christie's, and they were adding a lot of authors at that time. And so the second book was Stay of Execution. I didn't hear anything. I went ahead and self-published it, and then I heard from them, and they wanted it. And they wanted all, and when they found out that I was working on the third one, they decided they wanted all 3. So I had to unself-publish them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which was fine because I wanted to go wider than I was able to do myself. So it was a win-win for me.
Exactly. And so what was your experience self-publishing? I mean, you've done it for a while. It was out there. Was it a good experience, a bad experience, a learning experience?
I think it was a great learning experience.
In what
But
way?
I think that because I did learn what some of the different things that go into it, and you do have control. So you can change your price. You can, if you want to get a BookBub ad, then you would submit that yourself, and all these sorts of things that you have control. The cover is all your control. HarperCollins, because I had self-published, they did give me final say on all the covers. So that was really nice. But then some things are out of your control. So how it's priced, when they're going to run a sale, whether they submit for a BookBub ad, whether you get marketing at all. And the other difference is when you hire an editor, when you're self-publishing, you're having that one-to-one relationship. But experience was my editor had many books and authors she was working with, and she was great, but her time was definitely stretched. And so that it just made it a little bit harder, I think. And I think that publicity-wise, they got stretched.
Well, and I think a lot of writers are surprised that they have to do most of their own marketing. Was that also one of those rude awakenings for you early on?
Well, I think it was a little bit, but they did do some of the basic things. They booked a blog tour. I did get BookBub ads for 2 of the books, I think, but there weren't additional things that went along with that. And I think I naively thought that there would be more than there was. But I think that's true of a lot of people, and I don't think that now. And my current publisher is wonderful, and they're doing a lot of great things. But I think that authors generally recognize now it doesn't matter whether you're with a small publisher, you're self-publishing, or you're with your major house. If you don't put in the effort, it's not going to get seen.
So now the Detective Cancini mysteries are no more. They're out there, but
They're out there.
you're not planning to write anymore. So I don't know, this is a personal question. Did HarperCollins drop you, or did you want to move on?
They dropped a whole lot of authors.
Hmm.
So after the 3-book contract, I think this was true for several of the other authors that I had become friends with, also with the same imprint contracts, a bunch of us were not renewed. And I think over the last few years, and that's not a criticism of the imprint, I think it just, it wasn't going where HarperCollins wanted it to go. And I think they just decided that they weren't going to publish as many books from that imprint. So they just dialed back the number of authors. I think they grew a little bit too fast, that imprint, and they had to backpedal a little bit.
So how did it feel when they dropped you? I mean, that's got to hurt.
It does hurt. And right now it's there and they're still out there for sale. And so I'm not going to complain about that. I can direct anyone to buy them. They're still available. And they're there. It's still out there in the world, whether I self-published it or didn't self-publish them. So it's still a positive. and I'm happy they're there.
And so talk about Camcat Publishers, which is, I just came across them at, I think, Killer Nashville. I think it's a relatively new publishing house. They're publishing some really high quality stuff. Yours is it's a hardcover book.
Mhm.
And is my understanding that they'll accept pitches from agents, but also over the transom as well.
That's true. So for me, they are, I think, 3.5 years old, something in that time frame. Um, this book, Her Sister's Death, because it's got a little element and doesn't really fit any square peg, it notch. It's a little out of the normal. It's not a straight police procedural. It's not a straight cozy. It's not a straight psychological mystery. I pitched it to Camcat thinking that it would be a better fit. And
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
they have been just great. I've loved working with them. The editing was great. The Everyone I've worked with so far at Camcat has been very professional, very on time, exactly what they say they're going to do. I don't have any complaints at all.
Yeah. I edit people's manuscripts and I didn't come across any problems.
Yeah, I think they do a great job editing, and I do think they put out a really quality book. And of course, I love having a hardcover and an audio, and because HarperCollins, that imprint was digital first, those things didn't come with it.
Exactly. And it's an audiobook as well.
It's an audio book as well. Yep. And I got to hear the narrators and give my preferences for which ones that I wanted. And ultimately that's who they went with, which was great.
Yeah. Before I forget, Her Sister's Death is set partly in 1921.
Mhm.
So why 1921? What's that all about?
Well, I actually have another book that's sitting in my desk right now that is more of a historical suspense, and it's based on a true story, actually about something happened in Nashville, and it was in that time period, 1918. And so I'd done all this research. So I was just, for some reason, it was in my head. I didn't, when I started this book, Her Sister's Death, say to myself, oh, I'm going to make this a dual timeline. I just wrote the first few chapters with Val and Terry and just switched gears and started. It just was there. And I had all the research and I just felt the time. It just felt like it worked perfectly.
Was research fun? I mean, research can be a rabbit hole that you never get out of.
It is a rabbit hole. It is. Books started showing up and I got the question like, what is all this? Like, well, I'm just researching. And you do find yourself spending hours. Oh, I'll just look up this one thing and start making notes. And the next thing you know, 3 hours have gone by and you really didn't learn 3 hours worth of things that matter in your book.
A lot of advice I give writers about who are doing historical fiction is to, get oriented a little bit, then write the first draft and imagine what you don't know, so that will then help you target your research, so that then when you research, you'll be asking specific questions as opposed to just wallowing and trying to find out everything, which you'll never do. You'll never find out everything.
It's true. It's true. I did kind of have to back away and be like, okay, that's enough. That's enough. Which I did do. But anyway, I'm grateful I'd done all that, because when I wrote this book, I did no research except on hotels.
Yeah.
I did need to add to my hotel research.
Well, and one of the things you got right is there was a time where hotel windows opened all the way. And that doesn't happen anymore. And of course, that's been the way it is for a long time for obvious reasons. But it took a while for us to learn that, that can be a quick exit. Yeah,
well,
not
I
a good
also
idea.
looked up the elevators because I just was wondering, you don't know when elevators changed unless you look it up. Right. Just want to make sure I get it right. So there's little details like that you definitely look up.
When you say look up, I mean, what's your go-to source?
Well, that was just Google.
The Google.
The Google. Yes, but I mean, the other research I've done, I books are a big source for me too.
Okay. Okay. So, what kind of advice do you have for wannabe writers? People who, they are in another career, but there's this story that's nagging and wants to have a release. What kind of things have you learned along the way that you can help someone get off of dead center and find the kind of success you have?
Hmm. I do think that, going to either a class or reading books about writing or about the industry do help. I love going and reading books. I love going to conferences, and I did start doing that long before, going as a aspiring writer. You're not on a panel, you're just going and sitting in on the panels to see what you can learn from other writers. And it's amazing the things you can learn. You learn about the industries, you learn the industry, you learn lots of things.
But now writers tend to be shy and or introverted, so you would think that a writers conference would be daunting for some people.
It is, and even if you know people, it can be daunting because it's a lot of people. So that's actually true. I also think you can find this is one thing that I did that I would recommend is if you want to find contests or just try your hand at writing short stories for different things. It's a great way to start. It's and try to get them submit them to magazines or whatever. Nothing that anybody's charging you a lot of money for. That's obviously a scam, and you can look those kinds of things up. But the serious contests and stories that teach you to write in a certain number of words, I think I really do think it's a great way to get started because you haven't spent 2 years writing something. You've spent a short amount of time to get better at your craft, and then you can expand that as you go on. A lot of people talk about how a novel was inspired by a short story first that they wrote.
Right, right, right. One thing in your bio that I find interesting is that you saw Elvis live in concert in
Mhm.
1976.
Yes.
Uh, what kind of seats did you have?
I'm trying to remember. They weren't great, but I do remember my sister and I. Well, the reason we went, and the detail is my mother's maiden name was Presley.
Uh-huh.
So she wasn't related, but she was a lifelong fan, and her father, of course, hated Elvis, and even though they were not related, they would get calls in the middle of the night, "Is Elvis there?"
Oh,
And
geez.
he would hang up on them. So my parents took us, and my sister and I went, fought our way up to the front of the stage, but, I mean, that was obviously near the end of his life, and
Yeah, yeah.
but
Was it
still
a
a really
was it
experience.
I was gonna say a memorable experience, right?
It's my first concert.
Was it really?
Mhm,
Oh
mhm,
my. And
mhm.
then you were also at another concert recently with your daughter.
The Harry Styles one,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah. What was
Obviously,
that like?
going to those heartthrob shows.
Geez, what
He puts on a great show.
yeah? I
He
mean,
puts on a great show.
did you feel out of place or did you feel like you fit
Oh,
right in? No?
there there's so many moms there, and, he's good. I mean, we go to a lot of concerts in this house. Everybody, The Who, The Stones, I mean, lots of concerts.
Okay, okay.
Mhm.
So what's next
What's next?
in
So
terms of writing, not
what's
necessarily
next?
concerts?
What's next in writing is that I have a new book that I have completed it's a new series. So it's another detective series, but this one is a young woman in a smaller town, and it's out on submission right now.
Okay.
So we'll see.
And this is how people can contact you through your website, Kelly Larson, E-N, Murphy.com. And they can also email you at Kelly Larson Murphy at gmail.com. Obviously, it's not case sensitive, but she has three names and we want to make sure that they stand out. Anything else you want to add before I let you go? You've been very generous with your time,
Oh,
ma'am.
thank you. I so appreciate you having me. And I can add two things. One, I was thrilled that her sister's death was chosen by Once Upon a Book Club as their January selection. So I'll show
Wow.
you. I'm going to hold this up.
Okay.
This is the cover that they put on it. You see that
Yeah.
with their back, and
Oh my.
it went out to all of their subscribers, and it was an honor to be selected,
I've
which was
never, how many people are involved in something like that?
um like how many people subscribe?
Yeah. I mean, how many people would have gotten that?
In the thousands. So that's an awesome honor.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
was great. And then I just also wanted to mention that I read your book, and I
Oh,
love your character.
oh, thank you.
Lark is a great character, and she is a
Thank you.
reporter, which I love.
Well, thank you.
I'm a little partial to reporter characters.
Me too. It's about all I know. So thank you. This has been wonderful. I'm John DeDakis. You've been one-to-one with me, and I've been one-to-one with K.L., otherwise known as, to her friends, as Kelly Murphy. Kelly,
Thank you.
thanks very much.
Thank you so much.